This is Vaughan in Nova Scotia at westcoatvallepottery.ca. I'm just going to throw some honey jars this afternoon with a lid, and I thought I'd let you join along for a while. So I've got some balls of clay that are just about a pound, maybe just a bit under actually. So okay, it's back to the wheel. Yeah, it's been a busy day today with the sunny weather, about 14 degrees centigrade, so it's still cool. But when you get the sun out, people are starting to drive and walk along the beaches here. The first thing I'm going to say here is this is not enough clay. Let's see how much we can get from it. I think this is only about 3/4 of a pound. Now, if you want to have a little lid on it, the first thing I've got to do is thicken up that top there. So I just press my finger down with my fingers either side of it to thicken that a little bit. Gonna round off the belly just a touch. And then just in that thick area, I'm going to cut a little line about a 1/4 inch deep. And using the sharp point of the rib, I'm going to push that into that space. So I'm opening it up a little bit. And then very carefully, not too flat, just push that in, and that's the space where the lid goes. So let's get the water out. So basically it's just a flange that a little very shallow bowl upside down will sit inside there. And then I'll give myself a little groove. And then get the water off. And that's a little belly jar basically. It's nothing too difficult. Get the water out of there. I cut my round sponges in half all the time because I just find it easier to hold. This clay is 5/16. And then I'm going to measure it so I can get them all the same. So I'm going to try and get all these the same size. There we go. That's not too bad. That should work as a honey pot. Leave a little clay on the wheel and bang it down. Move the clay around, down, and press in with the side, down with the top. So once you move the clay around a couple of times, it will become a little easier and more consistent to open up. So then you move to this side. Don't thin it too much at the bottom. Press harder with these fingers on the outside and you'll keep it narrow. So dig in deep on the outside, press from the inside as well as the outside, and the height will just grow taller. And thicken your rim. So these fingers are pinching, and this finger goes down like that, and it really thickens the rim. Then dribble right on the rim, and it will go inside and outside. And then press with the inside fingers to give yourself a belly. And then I use the point of the rib to give myself a foot there. And then I'm going to dribble some water on the rim so it goes on the inside as well as the outside. And then I'm going to push against the belly from the inside to make it a bit wider. That caught on my finger on the inside. So let's dribble a bit more water on the rim because it was catching on my finger there. If you feel it catch, it will pull it off center. So after a while you'll learn to be very sensitive about that and just let go. As soon as you feel anything catch your finger, you have to let go slowly without letting go too quickly, otherwise it will go off center because of how fast you release too. It's a bit better now. So then you get the pin again. Hold right in the middle of that thickening area that you did. I press down a 1/4 inch or so. Wet your rib, push it right down in that gap that you just created with the pin, so it widens it with the point of the rib, and then you use the other side of the rib to press down, and don't make it totally flat, otherwise it will collapse. And then let go slowly. Sponge on a stick to get the water out. Then get the water off so it doesn't soften it anymore. Take a look at it. Make sure you got a nice curve. And then if you want to give yourself some sort of honey jar look, you can just use your finger. Let's get this finger on the inside too, and push in with the outside finger and out with the inside finger. And do that again. And there's that kind of honey pot look. You see that? Yeah, you can see that pretty good. All right. So, let's measure it. I'm so used to doing it that I'm pretty accurate. Look at that. I don't know if you can see from that angle. Exact. Now, exact's not good because the clay in the pot will shrink, and it may not be shrinking at the same rate. So I like to open it up a little bit more than I need to. Because if you make your lids too tight, they may not fit after the firing. And we're trained as potters to be as accurate as possible, but you've got to remember the glaze has a thickness too. Seal it down, make sure there's no water in between the batter and the actual clay. Press down hard from the top, press in from the side. Once it's down hard, press down again, and then in from the side, and do that faster a couple of times, and you'll get the centering as you actually equalize the pressure. Now, resting your elbow on your thigh or on the splash pan so your elbow can't be moved, and then let go slowly. This finger goes on top of that finger. Press down. As long as you're moist, keep going. As soon as it dries, let go slowly. Dribble some water in there and then pull out. Let go slowly. And then I come from the outer edge to the center to compress the bottom and make it flat. Fingers on the outside press in hard, and the fingers on the inside just resist a tiny bit. So the winner is the outside fingers that make it narrower. So once again, press in hard with the outside fingers. Start coming up the wall immediately so that every rotation you're a little bit higher up and you're staying on the wet sweet spot. Don't thin it too much at the top because we know we've got to fatten it up a little bit like that. Now put your fingers in, and I'm going to belly with the inside fingers this time. So the outside fingers are pressing back just a touch, not too much. And when you get to the top, let go a little bit because you want to be able to fatten that rim up a little bit. Give yourself a foot so you can get the wire underneath. Dribble some water down so it goes on the inside so we don't catch on it this time like I did the last time. Wet your fingers. Now use the rib is going to be curved like that, so it can create a curve with a profile of the rib, and then gently push out against the rib. And when you get to the top, curve back in a little bit with the top of the rib, so you end up with this belly shape. So you got a nice curve established with the rib like that. And gently push against the edge of the rib. And then push in. I'm digging deep with the corner of the rib to give me that little shoulder. And then just to make sure, I'm going to fatten that rib a little bit more. Fatten the rim rather, before I put this in. Not too far down, 1/4 inch is all you really need. Dribble some water into that slit before you actually push the tool in, so it's you've got it nice and slippery. And then use the other end of the rib that is right angled. And let go slowly, and get your water out before it starts to collapse. Okay, then I'm just going to grab the water off that rim there. Take a look at the outside. The sponge just gets rid of the water on there. Let's measure it again. I think this is a bit bigger than the last one. Nope, it's exact. There you go. And then, like I just showed you, if you want to make the little rings, you can push in from the outside, out from the inside. Same down there. Move it around. Don't be afraid of squishing down hard and then coming in hard from the side and moving it around. It's about balancing the pressure from the top and the side hand, because if it goes in one direction too much, then basically, you know, you've got to press a bit harder with the other hand. Okay, so we've got to make 3 little lids there. So let's, I'm going to push in here, get some water, in again, get some water on there. Don't go too far. It's actually, if you do go too far, it's not that big a deal because you can trim it later on. Now I'm going to dry it out and see how big it is. It's a bit small is my feeling, but yep, got a bit to go yet. That goes slowly. Perfect. And then you can see from the edge, I've left a lump of clay at the bottom, so I'm just going to cut with my pin. You can use a cheese wire for this as well, the regular wire that you use for cutting, until it comes loose. And there's your little lid with a lump of clay underneath, which you can use to throw a little knob later on. So how did I do that? Let's go over that slowly. You take half the amount of this clay. Now I'm going to get 3 lids from this lump of clay. So that's where the knob will be. Flatten it down a bit because it'll be easier to get down in there evenly. Wet it. Put your middle finger on top and this middle finger, so doing it like that, I should middle to middle finger. And the middle finger on the right stays pushing against the little lump of clay underneath. So you need to wet it to make sure that it's still sliding. So the middle finger is just sliding along the middle finger of my right hand to make the lid get wider. And as long as it's lubricated, keep your finger underneath in contact. But as soon as it starts to dry a little bit, you've got to let go. So there's the lid. Let's see if it's big enough. And it's perfect. Sorry about that. Okay, it comes after 47 years. Also, lubricate your finger a bit. You can make that knob a little bit smaller by putting pressure on from the outside, so that you won't have to trim as much. There you go. And then when I cut it, I just need to leave a little bit of clay there so that I can make a knob out of it. And there we go. So we've got enough left for 1 more lid. Okay, so wet it properly, push in underneath. That's where the knob's going to be, down there. I'm not going to make it too narrow, but then middle finger to middle finger. Let's do it that way again. So it's easy to remember. Middle finger presses down. The middle finger on the right hand stays pushing against the little lump of clay underneath. Let go as soon as it sticks. It was starting to stick then. So wet it again. Wet finger, water down the clay as well, and you push with the middle finger on my left hand is just pushing against, drying out already. There you go. So the middle finger on my right hand is stopping it from collapsing. So let's get the water off. I think that's a touch small at the moment. Yep, just about 1/8 of an inch. So I'm going to wet the underside with a sponge so I can stick my finger underneath again, and just with the middle finger on the inside and just pushing out just a touch, and that should be big enough now. And let's measure it again. Oh, it went out a lot, but I can trim it. See, that's the great thing. But it's also easy enough just to push back a touch. If you find you made it too big, just push back just a touch, and you can curve the lid a little bit. It's only barely bigger now, so it'd be easy to trim that a tiny bit. Yep, just a tiny bit big, so it'll be trimmable. So when I fit this later on, I'll be able to trim just a tiny bit, like 1/8 of an inch off the outer it, and that will fit. And then to get this one off, I can either use a pin, put some water on the wheel, and just lift it up. 3 lids and 3 honey jars. I'm just gonna make the knobs now. This is how I threw them, upside down, remember yesterday? So they're firmed up a little bit now. So I just have to cut them off so we can get a couple of these going. There you go. So fasten the jar in there. I did a perfect job in making these tight, but after the glaze is on, this is never going to stick. I'll never fit back in there, so I'm going to have to shrink the lid down a little bit. But all I do, and another thing that's an advisable thing on this, is if you are going to do this, it's a good idea if you make a couple of strips of paper so that you don't, make sure that this doesn't stick in there. You just need a couple, that way you can pull one up and it'll lift the lid. Have I got power? Yes, I have power. Let's bend those down, it'll be a little distracting. So I'm just going to rethrow little lids on here now. So I'm just basically taking that lump of clay that was on the bottom there, and I'm forcing it. It's still soft enough so I can change its shape. And make a little dob. Now I often put birds or something on my pieces, so I could just trim this off and place a bird on there. But for people who don't like doing a little sculpture thing, it's nice if you could rethrow a knob on here. You could also stick a odd piece of clay, like a little ball, like a round ball, if you want to do that. You could make a little spiral kind of coil and bend it up. But as you can see, it's very easy just to refine that knob. And remember not to press too hard and you'll lift it right off. But there's a knob. Let's get it cleaned up. Right, that was easy. All right, and then you just lift this and it lifts it up. And then just be careful you don't touch it because it's wet and it might mark. And I'm going to trim these down a little bit so they fit inside there better. So I'm not going to let it sit flat yet. But let's do another one to show you another. This is one I did the little rings on. Now this one was a bit tight, see? So let's give myself that to go in there again. So just get it sitting on there flush. Same again, basically. And if the clay gets too hard, which these are borderline, you can actually just dip them in water, just the knob area, and soften them back down again, obviously. I should have done these last night, but I worked pretty late last night, 7:30. And so I just closed up the cupboard and said, well, take my chance, because I can always put bird sculptures on if they get too dry. I make my fingernails, because I don't have much of a nail anyway, but I make my fingernail go underneath there a little bit. Let's take a look at it. Now, people who have arthritis like to have a larger knob on something, so you could actually make this obviously much larger, but it's actually in proportion to the actual. And here's another thing, using your paintbrush, because that's got water in it that lubricates it, you can actually just do that and squash down over the ferrule of the paintbrush. I remembered it. Always have a hard time remembering the name of that little metal piece. See how I've gone underneath there using that ferrule? So that would be a little easier to pick up. I need a rag. Okay, well that's all I wanted to quickly show you for that. So I'll be trimming the underside of these later on. You can also trim that lid. So that's a big lump of clay there. I just wet it a little bit just to smooth it a bit. But then there's nothing to stop you if you leave enough clay at the bottom just to trim off enough clay so you're left with a knob. I wasn't careful lifting these off the wheel when I threw them, so they're a bit bent out. But when I trim it, it will go back to round. I'm keeping the bulk there while I'm trimming the underside, so I've got more to grip on. Okay, let's make sure this isn't, it just moved up a little bit, so I'm going to push it back in there a bit. Now, when you're trimming, a lot of people have trouble trimming because they let the tool sit on the pot and just take a skimmed layer off. But that, if it's out of center, doesn't actually put it back onto center. But you can see that is sticking out quite a bit on one side. So I'm just going to use my trimming tool and holding it so my arm doesn't move, I just catch the bit that sticks out the furthest amount. So it's only touching on one side. And that's like being on a wood turner's lathe. When you've got a odd-shaped piece of wood, they don't just let the tool stick. They rest the tool on a little bed, like a steel thing that goes across the turning lathe, and then as the wood hits the chisel, it takes a bit off, and that's all I'm doing here. And then get rid of this stuff. because I wet it. I shouldn't have wet it because the clay is sticking to the lid where the water dribbled down. But I wanted to smooth it a bit, and then basically just take off any kind of crappy little bits that are sticking on there. And there's another knob. There you go. And I wasn't going to put the paper in there because it's actually, and this will need to be trimmed at the edge too, so the lid is a bit smaller. And, get it off again. So there's another one. This one, the lid is a really nice fit, but it's too tight. I want to trim a little bit more off that one later as well. The same again, basically. Let's tighten this up a bit. Let's see, what one of these might be a bit loose. No, they're all pretty good. So I'm not going to use water again, so I won't add the paper in there. But anyway, just use the lathe idea where your arm is not resting on the clay, it's just catching the bit that sticks the furthest out. So now it's just catching the bit that's sticking a bit further out. Now this is a good idea. If the clay is a bit dry, which this was, it's easier to do this than actually re-throw a little knob. That's a solid piece of clay, remember, there. So I can go in quite a long way without worrying about it, as long as I don't go so wide that it actually makes the knob fall off. This is that tool which is called an R2 tool. I use it for most of my trimming, unless it's a huge piece, because it's like a detail tool. It's so small. It's got a flat edge at one side and a round at the other. That's also really useful. It's made by Kemper. The problem is they wear out fast. And then just finish up with the top. And there you go. So that's easy enough to pick up, fingertips. That sits on there nicely. So that's 4 lids rounded. Now the only thing I have to try and do is trim off a tiny little bit on the outer rim there. So let's do that next. I have an old one of my coffee mugs here. Actually, I don't know what's wrong with that one. I don't know why it's here. I should put that back out on the shelf. But before I do, I'm going to take a little bit off. Just need the cylinder. You know what? I made one, didn't I? So I can save my mug. This one is out of the kiln that I did when I was doing the thin vases. I've forgotten I'd even made this. Let's see if it's... I'm just going to take just a tiny little bit off. I'm now resting the tool because this is a centered piece of clay, so I'm just resting the tool on there so I can take sort of an even amount off all the way around. I don't want to take too much, so check it. So that's what it looks like. And there we got it inside there. So that's now enough of a gap. So it's wobbling just a little bit. So when the glaze gets on there, I don't think it will actually stick it in. This one's a little big too. So if I can see if I can center this a bit better than the last one. Pull it over this way a bit. gonna say, it seems like okay, that's about as good as we're gonna get it. So I just need to take a little bit off the outer edge. I have a brush that I should be doing that instead of blowing, I guess. And then I'm gonna just smooth the edge where I trimmed, and then check it. So once again, it's borderline. Maybe I'll take a touch more off that one, but barely anything. It is a bit of a guess when you're doing the lid thing, because you really don't know the glaze thickness until you glaze. Just take a little bit more. Now here's a dilemma for honey pots. I have those little honey dippers that I put inside the lid, but I have had people not buy my honey pots because I did that. Because they say, some people say that they get ants in their kitchens, and the ants will find sugar. So they don't like having a hole in the lid, but I am going to put little holes in these. So, but that's always a dilemma. See, here's the little wobble. That's what I feel secure, knowing the glaze thickness. You know, and you can fire these on the pots as well. But okay, let's see what we have here. That one's really tight fit, but it goes right in. Okay, this one almost looks like it was thrown with the pot. All right, and look at that. It's perfect as it sits on there, so that's nice, but it's got to sit inside the flange. It's one I just re-threw, so it's a little wetter than the others. When you throw it does actually, and so the trimming's going to stick to this. I don't know if I should wait for a while. If it falls down the outside, it won't matter. There we go. It's a little sticky. Okay, we got that little gap on that side, so I move it over, and so you can see you've got a nice little wobble in there, so that by the glaze on there, it should fit just right. And the last one is this one. Although I've made 8 of these, so too far over. Still too far over. I might have to throw myself another one of these collars, because this one is thicker on one side than the other, so when things sit inside it, it actually makes them wobble. This was done for the vases. Yeah, it's thin on this side and thicker on there, that's why it makes every little lid wobble a bit. And there's the last one. So that's a good gap there, so that we know it's going to fit after the firing. Right, the next thing we have to do is put some little holes in the lids of whichever ones these we're going to use for honey. I have little honey dippers here, and we need to put a hole in the lid so the honey dipper, because it gets loaded with honey, never gets put out. So then you have the question of whether you want to do that, because people sort of say that the honey hole in the honey lid thing is going to allow insects and bugs in there. So then it's that whole age-old thing where basically you can do it either way. So you can just have to have some of these with a hole and some without a hole. I don't know, I've never been able to figure this one out, because ants shouldn't be in the kitchen anyway, but then I have cats on my table, so I guess everybody does different things. But anyway, what I do is I take a coin, and I draw. Actually, let's take it off here so that we can do the lid first. Get you tilted down a bit more. You basically draw around the coin so that you've got a nice clean curve. Cut it out, and you can kind of use I would use a sponge or a paintbrush with some water on it to kind of smooth out this little cut, even though it's not too bad. It'd be nice if it's got a rounded, smooth edges to it. Then you place it onto your pot, so you can see where the hole is going to be in here, and the honey dipper is only about 1/4 inch, I think, so I've made a little notch there, and very carefully cut it out. I'm not sure if you can hear the wind out there. We've had like 3 days of really bad wind here. It's like 50 kilometers an hour, but yesterday it was gusting really hard. And the wind chill tonight's going to be -9 centigrade. We're going to be -3. We've been going up and down. It's been a weird spring. Okay, little notch. Lid goes over there. And then you've got your little honey dipper. You're going to make sure it fits. That's plenty of room. Okay, remember the glaze will fill that up a little bit, but that's plenty of room. So this will sit inside. And then you just have to have a few of them like this. And people who don't have ants in the kitchen will buy these ones. And people who have ants in the kitchen you just have to tell them they can buy one without a hole in it and just use a spoon to get the honey out. Anyway, there you go. It's funny, as a potter, we're trying to solve all these problems for people. And I'm Mirandy. Got somebody come to visit. Mirandy. But anyway, so just kind of try and have a bit of everything. Try to make everybody happy all the time. All right. So thanks very much, and we'll move on to the glazing next, or bisque firing and then glazing.